Initiation by Robert Hugh Benson. Part 2, Chapter 7, Part 1. Subsection 1. Aunt Anna knew the instant that she saw the coated and capped figure coming across the lawn to her that the first stage had been reached. She said nothing at all as she held out her hands at the foot of the pavilion stairs, down which she had come so soon as she had recognized him. He said nothing as he took them. Still holding one of his hands, she led him back whence she had just come. He was in his driving coat still, though the day once more was hot and stifling, and his big cap was pulled forward. His face was quite quiet, but his eyes looked a little uncertain. They blinked 3 or 4 times as he stared, first at her, and then past her at the park beyond, drowsing in the strong sunshine. She thanked God that Jim was still out. "Well, it is all over," he said presently, without introduction or greeting. "She told me what she thought of me last night. Yesterday afternoon, I mean. So I have come back to Hartley, you see." He spoke slowly and deliberately, like a dreamer. His voice shook ever so slightly in his last sentence. "Yes, you have come back to Hartley, my dear," she said. Then she saw Masterson come down the steps from the house and hesitate. "I'll just go and speak to Masterson," she said. "You'll wait here till I come back?" "Masterson," she said, "Sir Neville has had a shock. Don't ask him any questions as to his luggage. I expect he hasn't brought any." "No," said the butler, staring straight at her. His face was all set with anxiety. "If it is to be sent for, I'll let you know this afternoon. I'll tell you anything I can as soon as I know myself." She spoke as to a friend who shared her sorrow. The old man's face twitched violently, then he wheeled and went back up the steps. When she entered the pavilion again, Neville had not moved. He sat still in the low chair, looking out through the window. His eyes turned to meet hers, and then wandered back again to the sunlit park. On the window seat on which she had been sitting lay a book or 2 she had been reading, a rosary of red stones and silver, and 6 unopened envelopes. Her post had been just brought to her, and the man gone again, when she had seen Neville coming. "My dear, take off your coat and cap." He sat forward a little and unbuttoned the double-breasted coat. She took hold of it behind, but he shook his head, and himself slipped it off, and then his cap, laying them on the floor. He was in the same grey suit in which he had gone away. He seemed a little shrunken and small. Then he leaned back again, and she sat on the window seat. "I don't think there's anything more to say," he said in that same toneless voice. "She told me what she thought of me when we were out driving. I went home, back to Elizabeth Street, I mean, and later on I sent a message round to her mother. Her mother came after dinner, but it didn't help much. She said that Enid wouldn't speak to her, and then she said some more things, but they weren't any use. So I've come back to Hartley." "Where's Jim?" "Jim's out riding." "That's all right," said Neville. "With the collies, I suppose?" "Yes, with the collies." There fell a silence again. Somewhere within Aunt Anna's soul, something seemed spinning like a wheel, so fast that no revolutions could be perceived. But there was an intense and indescribably swift movement. Or it was like a single note, sustained at a pitch so high as to be inaudible, or a colour so bright as to be invisible. This movement in her was so keen that it appeared to absorb into itself all lesser emotions and impulses, leaving her reason cool and capable. It was with this upper part of her perceptions that she saw that she must be very quiet and unemotional and sensible. He must not sit there forever, yet she must not disturb him yet. "Would you like lunch out here?" she said. He did not seem to hear her, and she repeated her question. "Oh, yes," he said. "I'll go in and tell them presently." Again, he did not answer. "We'll just sit here quietly," she went on, still tranquil and steady. "And you can talk, or not, just as you like. If you'll smoke a cigarette, I'll have one too." He drew out his case and held it out. She took one and lit it from a box of matches on the table. He held his case mechanically when she gave it back, and did not take a cigarette out for himself till she held the burning match silently before him. Then he lit it and leaned back again. "You brought Charleston with you?" "I don't know. Yes, I think he was behind." "And you drove yourself?" "Yes. I couldn't see very well. It was dusty. I think I've got some dust in my eyes." Here was an opportunity. She got off the seat and went and kneeled down at his side, laying her cigarette on the floor. It tasted like brown paper and hay. And took out a handkerchief. He looked at her. "Lean right forward," she said, "and I'll take the dust out." He leaned forward obediently. She put one hand on the top of his head to steady herself, and with the handkerchief ready in the other, searched those eyes that mechanically rolled this way and that for her search. There was one horrible thrill when she thought that she would break down altogether, as she felt the texture of his hair under her hand, and held her own face so close to that dear face and eyes of his, the eyes as simple and miserable as those of a child in pain. She even felt his breath on her mouth. She delicately wiped the corner of each eye. "There, I think it's out," she said, sitting back on her heels. Then she went back to the window seat. A quarter of an hour later, she met Masterson in the hall. "Come into the dining room," she said. He followed her in and shut the door. "First of all," she said, "we will lunch in the pavilion. Tell them downstairs. Bring it all out on a tray together, everything, you understand. If there is a hot sweet, don't bring it, but bring everything else on the tray all ready. And bring it yourself, please. Master Jim must lunch upstairs and not come out till I send for him. Arrange that, please. Next, tell Charleston and Paul, so soon as they have dined, that they must go straight back to Elizabeth Street. Charleston is to pack all Sir Neville's things and bring them back with him before dressing time this evening. While he is doing that, Paul is to go round to Mrs. Bessington's flat, he'll know that, and leave this note on her. It's possible that Mrs. Bessington may wish to come back in the car. If so, she will give him the answer herself, if she is in. If she is not, he must find out where she is and go after her. He is to bring her down here this evening, if she wishes to come. I don't know in the least whether she will stay the night or not if she does come. Just tell them downstairs to be ready. And, Masterson, just tell them all that Sir Neville is in great trouble, and that they are not to gossip. But I don't think they will. They must notice nothing. Don't say a word to him, even yourself. Will you, Masterson? He is in great trouble. The marriage is broken off. That is all I know myself. Subsection 2. Half an hour after lunch, trembling a little, she suggested his going to his room and lying down. To her astonishment he consented, saying that he had rather a headache. He stumbled once or twice as he went down the pavilion steps and up again into the house. He seemed dazed into a dreadful kind of childish simplicity. He had eaten and drunk just a little, without comments or refusals. She saw him into his room and promised to look in later. She had learned practically nothing more than he had told her at first. He had repeated 3 or 4 times that Enid had told him what she thought of him, that he was selfish and brutal. Aunt Anna steadied herself by a violent effort only when she understood this. She made no comment except the simplest. "She doesn't know you really," she had said quietly. She had restrained herself with considerable difficulty from commenting upon Enid. What, however, bewildered her most of all was her hopeless attempt to understand what kind of person Enid must really be. She had, as had been seen, suspected her of a few rather undesirable qualities, and even this suspicion she had discounted because of her knowledge of her own jealousies. But she could not honestly say to herself that she had noticed any symptoms whatsoever of that astounding cruelty which Neville's little story revealed. At any rate, Enid was not an adventuress. She had been engaged to a man of a quite considerable wealth and position, and had flung him over, savagely and violently, without the faintest excuse. For Aunt Anna to hear that Neville had been called selfish and brutal was for her to know that the girl who so described him must, practically, be mad. But what motive could she have? What occasion could have produced such a fantastic lie? What misunderstanding could be so complete? Or was there no motive at all? Was it merely a ferocious and wild irresponsibility? She sent for Jim as she passed downstairs again on her way to the garden. He must be prepared in some kind of way for the situation which must reign in the house for the present. When he came out, looking a little scared, for Masterson had been rather emphatic with him, she made him climb up onto the window seat behind her. "Jim, my dear, I want to talk to you as if you were grown up." "Yes, Mummy," said Jim, making himself perfectly comfortable with a cushion. "Cousin Neville has come back again suddenly. You remember that when he went away, Miss Bessington had promised to marry him? Well, Miss Bessington is not going to marry him after all." "Oh?" said Jim, wriggling a little on his cushion. "Well, Cousin Neville is very sad and unhappy about it, because, you see, he was very fond of Miss Bessington. You mustn't call her Cousin Enid any more, by the way." "I didn't want to at first," observed Jim. "Well, what I want to say is this, that you mustn't talk at all to Cousin Neville, when you see him, about what he's been doing in London. And you mustn't look at him as if you wanted to know what was the matter. And of course you mustn't ask him, because all that might make him more unhappy. Do you see?" Jim nodded solemnly. "Just try to think of Cousin Neville as he was before Miss Bessington and her mother came here at all. As he was even before he went away to Rome." "Oh, Mummy." "Yes, my boy? Why was Cousin Neville so fond of Miss Bessington?" She set her teeth for an instant. "I don't know," she said in a low voice. "Well, do you understand? I'm talking to you just as I would talk to a grown-up person, because I think you will. And if Mrs. Bessington comes down this evening, and you see her, either tonight or tomorrow, just be quite polite, but don't talk to her or ask her questions at all." Jim nodded again. His eyes were round and meditative. These were great matters. "And there's one other thing I want you to do for me. I want you to go to the stables and order Marcus to be saddled again. Then come back to me here and I'll give you a note. I want you to mount in the stables and ride over to Mr. Morpeth and give him the note. Then you can do as you like till tea. I want you to have tea upstairs again, unless I send for you." Subsection 3. By 6 o'clock Mr. Morpeth had long been gone again, and she sat, alone once more, waiting for the next event, whatever that might be. The car was not yet come back. She had slipped upstairs 2 or 3 times and peeped into Neville's room, and every time he had been lying quite still with his eyes closed and his cheek resting on his hand. Once he had opened his eyes in a vague, dazed kind of way, and she had slipped out again noiselessly. She had not even sent tea upstairs. The old man had said very little about Enid when she had told him all she knew. He seemed quite uninterested in the personal cause of all this pain. The one thing that was their job, he had said, was Neville. "But have you any theory at all?" she asked. "It may be any one of 3 or 4 things," he said. "It is of no use to theorize. I should suppose she is just an egoist with a particular temperament. But that is not the point. He had described the point, then, more carefully. It consisted entirely in Neville's attitude. 3 things, he said, may be done when real pain is encountered. It may be resisted, or it may be allowed to crush, or it may be accepted. The violent man does the first, the weak man the second, and in both cases it leads to catastrophe. "But I think our friend will accept it," he said. "He can do nothing at present except realize it. But I think he will accept it when he understands, or else I do not see why God has permitted it." He had said then very little. He had not been dogmatic in any way, yet his very presence brought a bracing kind of reassurance. He seemed so absolutely certain that all was in order, that there was nothing whatever to be astonished at, still less to fear. "He will not break down, he will not kill himself, he will not fling himself into any other extreme. Of all that I am confident. You must brace him, Mrs. Fanning, not try to console him. You must not soften him in any way at all. You have been crying?" "Just a little," she said, "before you came, not before him." "You must not before him." And so, at last, he had gone, leaving her steadied and courageous. It was as the clock was striking 6 that she looked out through the pavilion door and saw Mrs. Bessington following Masterson out upon the lawn. It was almost appalling to Aunt Anna to see how wholly herself this woman seemed. She was in the very same black, hot-looking mantle in which she had gone away. She moved with the same busy kind of step, neither retarded nor accelerated by the knowledge she bore. She smiled in the same rather hard and wooden kind of way. And, as she greeted Aunt Anna, she began as usual her rapid, unconnected comments on the warmth of the day and the kindness of Mrs. Fanning in sending the motor for her. "But I must be getting back this evening," she said. "There is a most excellent train that stops only 3 times between here and London, that leaves at 5 minutes after 8. We came down in very good time." Aunt Anna could bear it no longer. "Mrs. Bessington," she said, "you'll forgive me for interrupting you." "Oh, my dear, no, please let me say right out what I want. Then I want to hear what you think of it all. When I am sure—" "Please let me say right out what I have in my mind," said Aunt Anna, in so exceedingly an emphatic tone that the other stopped and, so to speak, folded up her mouth. And it was then for the first time that Anna saw through the shallow-looking grey eyes that regarded her a look of extreme and poignant interest. Then Aunt Anna began. She took about 5 minutes to say what she had to say. She had asked Mrs. Bessington to come down immediately because she wished really to get at the facts, and because Neville would say nothing. She knew that Miss Bessington had spoken to him in such a manner that he had, apparently, taken it for granted that the engagement was at an end. Well, Neville's happiness was of the greatest possible moment to herself. She might say that there was practically nothing for which she cared more. She had asked down Mrs. Bessington, therefore, first in order to learn the facts at once that there might, for instance, be no doubt about the matter if the engagement were finally at an end. Next, if it were not, to know that instead. Thirdly, in order, if Neville wished it, that he might have an opportunity of seeing her. She eyed, rather anxiously, the house door from time to time. She had deliberately given orders that Mrs. Bessington was to be shown straight out here without concealment, but she intended, if she saw Neville coming out, to go and meet him and tell him who was come. "It is entirely unconventional and very impertinent of me to have asked you down like this," she ended. "But I know you will forgive me. I stand very nearly to him as a mother might. It struck me as the only thing that I could think of to do. Will you very kindly tell me what you think?" She looked her full in the face, and then she began to understand.